She was still smiling when she walked out of his hotel suite. That was the part that broke Elena Voss. Not the stranger's face, not the borrowed shirt hanging loose off her shoulders, not even the way the woman laughed at something on her phone like the morning belonged to her. It was the smile, easy, unhurried, the smile of someone who had nowhere better to be. Elena stood frozen in the corridor of the Harrington Grand, the ultrasound photo pressed flat against her palm. The edges were already soft from how many times she'd folded and unfolded it since the clinic. 12 weeks. Strong heartbeat. She'd driven 40 minutes through morning traffic just to surprise him, just to see his face when she told him. She never made it to the door. If you've ever stood in a hallway and watched your entire future rearrange itself in front of you, stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the price of silence. Hit that like button, drop your city or country in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. This one's going to take everything you have. Elena Voss was not a woman who fell apart easily. She had grown up in a house where crying was something you did in the shower, with the water running loud enough to cover the sound. Where you learned early that feelings were private things, expensive things, things you kept folded up inside your chest, like documents you hoped you'd never need. Her mother had been practical, and her father had been absent, and somewhere between those two facts, she had built herself into a person who could handle most things standing up. She had handled the first year of marriage to cash in Moretti standing up, the cancelled dinners, the phone calls that came at 2 o'clock in the morning and pulled him out of bed like a hook through the jaw, the security team stationed outside every restaurant they ever tried to eat at together. She had handled all of it with the quiet patience of someone who believed the man underneath the machine was worth the wait. What she could not handle was the smile. The woman who stepped out of suite 1408 was perhaps 28, dark hair still damp at the ends. She wore a white dress shirt that Elena recognized. She had ironed that shirt herself 4 months ago, had hung it in the wardrobe of their home in Westport, had noticed when it disappeared from the closet 2 weeks later, and assumed it had gone to the dry cleaner. The woman had the collar turned up and the cuffs rolled to the elbow, and she was texting someone with both thumbs and smiling at whatever the response was. And she moved down the corridor without looking up, without looking at Elena at all, like Elena was furniture, like Elena was the one who didn't belong there. Elena's hand went cold around the ultrasound photo. She looked down at it. The tiny comma shape of the baby was visible even in the poor corridor lighting. The spine curled, the skull barely formed. 12 weeks. The woman was already at the elevator, already gone, and the only evidence she had ever existed was the faint drag of her perfume and the fact that Elena's entire understanding of her marriage had just quietly collapsed like a building that had been undermined for years before the walls finally gave. She did not knock on the door. She didn't scream. She didn't call his name. What she did instead was fold the photo in half, then in half again. She pressed it into her coat pocket, and then she turned around and walked to the elevator and pressed the button, and stood with her back very straight and her eyes very dry until the doors opened and she got inside and the doors closed behind her. She made it to the parking garage before her knees stopped working. She sat on the concrete floor between her car and the next one, her back against the driver's side door, and she pressed both hands flat to the ground because the ground was the only thing that felt real. Then she got up, got in the car, and drove home. She did not call him. Cassian Moretti's morning had been entirely ordinary, which was itself a kind of lie, because nothing about Cassian Moretti's life had been ordinary for the past 22 years. He had built his empire the way most men of his particular background did, through a combination of intelligence, violence, and the willingness to make decisions that other men flinched from. Now at 41, he was the kind of man who did not need to raise his voice because everyone in any room he entered already knew exactly what he was capable of. He took his morning coffee by the window of suite 1408, watching the city come alive 12 floors below. He did not think about Elena. This was not unusual. This was in fact the problem, though Cassian would not understand that until much later, when the shape of what he had lost became visible to him. The way the scale of a landscape only becomes clear when you're standing at the bottom of it. He loved his wife the way certain men love things they believe are permanent, without urgency, without demonstration, with the comfortable certainty of someone who has never once considered losing her. The house was quiet when he walked in. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and sat in the chair in the sitting room and opened the report Silas had sent over, and he read it for 40 minutes. And then he ate the dinner that the housekeeper had left covered on the stove, and then he went to bed. Elena did not come home. She answered on the 3rd call the next morning. "Elena, I'm not coming back, Cassian." He went very still. "What does that mean?" "It means what I said, Elena. Whatever happened, whatever you think happened, you need to talk to me. You can't just see her. I was there, Cassian, at the hotel. I came to surprise you, and I saw her walking out of your suite wearing your shirt, and I need you to understand something." He heard her breathe. "I'm not calling to fight. I'm not calling to hear an explanation. I'm calling because you deserve to know that I was there. That's all. Elena, don't. I'm not confused. I'm not overreacting. I know what a woman looks like walking out of a man's hotel room in his shirt. I know what that is." He had been alone until his 11 o'clock call. There had been no woman. There had been no one. There was nobody there. He said, "Cassian, there was nobody there, Elena. I was alone all morning. I don't know who you saw, but she wasn't with me. She was never with me." A silence long enough that he thought she had hung up, long enough that he had time to notice his own heartbeat had changed register, was doing something unfamiliar in his chest, something that felt like the first clean note of fear. "That's what they all say," Elena said, and hung up. B. He called back 14 times. She did not answer. By 9 a.m., Cassian had driven back to the Harrington Grand and was standing at the front desk with a particular expression on his face that made hotel staff suddenly remember things they had not previously recalled. The manager brought the security footage himself. The timestamp read 9:47 a.m., the angle covered the corridor outside Suite 1408. And there, emerging from the door with the easy confidence of someone who had every right to be there, was a woman Cassian had never seen before in his life. Dark hair, white shirt, his shirt. He recognized it now, the particular cut of the collar, the monogram that Eleanor had insisted on when she ordered it for his birthday. He felt something cold move through him. "Who is she?" he said. "The security supervisor. She checked in 2 days ago. A reservation under the name Claire Vander. Paid cash. No identification on file beyond what was submitted, which our team has since identified as fraudulent. We'll find out who she is," he said. "Today, not a question. Today." Cassian looked back at the screen. The timestamp, the corridor, the woman walking out of a room he had been sleeping in, wearing a shirt that had once hung in his wardrobe at home with an expression on her face like she owned the morning. He thought about Elena standing somewhere in that same corridor watching this. He picked up his phone and called her again. This time, she didn't answer and did not call back, and the voicemail box was full. And when he tried the apartment of her friend Mara answered and said Elena wasn't there, and said it in the particular tone of voice that told him Mara knew exactly where Elena was and had been instructed to say otherwise. He sat down on the stool at Eleanor's drafting table, set his phone face down, and for the first time in perhaps 20 years, Cassian Moretti sat completely still and did not know what to do next. In the pocket of her coat, folded twice, the ultrasound photo waited in a drawer on the other side of the city. 12 weeks, strong heartbeat, a life he did not yet know existed that had been on its way to him that morning before everything went wrong. He would find out. He would eventually find all of it out. But first would come the silence. And the silence, he was beginning to understand, was its own kind of verdict. The silence lasted 6 days. 6 days. No calls returned, no messages, nothing. On the 7th morning, Silas Romano arrived at the house in Westport without calling first. "Tell me," Cassian said. "The woman from the hotel, Claire Vander, the name is a construction. Built 18 months ago, social security number purchased, credit history manufactured. Who built it? Someone who knew how. She was placed." Silas continued. "The reservation for the room adjacent to yours was made 6 weeks before your stay. Whoever did this knew your schedule, your hotel preferences, the specific suite you use when you're in the city for overnight meetings." He paused. "They knew about the shirt." That last part landed differently. Cassian looked up. "What do you mean they knew about the shirt?" "The shirt she was wearing, monogrammed, the same brand and cut you use. It wasn't yours specifically. We confirmed your wardrobe is intact. It was a duplicate ordered 4 months ago from the same tailor with the same monogram from a different billing address. This was built for her, Cassian said. Not a question. The entire thing was staged for an audience of one. Silas finally opened the folder, slid a photograph across the table. Security camera from the parking structure beneath the hotel. Timestamp 9:41 a.m., 6 minutes before the woman left your floor. Then he said very quietly, "Who?" Silas closed the folder. "I don't know yet. But you have a direction." A pause that lasted 1 second too long. "I have some early indicators. Nothing I'm ready to bring to you yet." Cassian looked at him. Silas met the look without moving. "Then move faster," Cassian said. Silas picked up the folder and left. That Elena was staying at a place she had rented under her maiden name, Voss, not Moretti, in a neighborhood on the north side of the city that Cassian's world did not typically touch. It was a 2-room apartment on the 4th floor of a building that had a broken elevator and a superintendent who asked no questions. She just needed it to be a place where she could breathe until she figured out what came next. She was 8 weeks into figuring that out when her phone rang and the screen said Mara, and she answered it. "He's asking questions," Mara said. "Not to me directly, through people. You know how he does it." Elena sat down on the edge of the bed. "How long?" "I think he's known roughly where you are for at least a week. I think—" Mara stopped. "I think he's not coming, Elena. I don't know what that means. I thought you should know. You need to tell him." "Mara, I know. I know what you're going to say, but you need to think about it. But I'm not. I can't have that conversation right now. I can't stand in front of him with this and have him think that it's leverage or that I'm coming back because of it. I can't." "Okay, but Elena, he's not going to stop looking." "I know," Elena said. "He never stops. But the cracks in the organization started the way structural damage always starts, invisibly, then all at once." Cassian had been running on diminished attention for 3 weeks now, and in his world, diminished attention was an invitation. He had found her location on day 9. He had driven there on day 11. He had sat in the car for 22 minutes and then driven home. It was Silas who finally forced the issue. Not about Elena, but about business. "You need to be present," Silas told him. "Catello called twice. The Travano arrangement is hanging by. Handle Catello." "I have been handling Catello. I've been handling a lot of things, but there's a limit to what I can hold in place without you. If you want to go get your wife, go get her. But you can't continue to be half present and expect the architecture to hold. That's not how this works." "You're right," Cassian said. "Set the Travano meeting for Thursday. I'll be there." Silas nodded. Left. Cassian sat alone in the office on Carmine Street and pulled out his phone and called Elena's number for the first time in 8 days. "I need to see you," he said. "No, Elena. I said no." He heard her breathing. "Calling me doesn't change anything. I have proof." He said that the woman was planted, that the whole thing was staged. "I have security footage. I have a false identity constructed specifically to stop." Her voice had changed, something moving through it that he couldn't name. "Stop, Cassian. I hear what you're saying. Then let me show you. It doesn't matter." The words came out quiet, but with a weight behind them that he felt physically. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? Even if everything you're saying is true, even if I believe you completely, it doesn't fix what was already broken." He said nothing because she was right, and he knew she was right. And knowing she was right was a different kind of pain than anything he had experienced in a long time. "You want to come show me evidence?" Elena continued. "You want to bring me proof and have me understand you didn't do this thing, and then you want us to go back to—" She stopped. "To what exactly? To you working 18-hour days and me learning how to not mind to dinners where your phone is more present than you are to 4 years of marriage where I stopped telling you things because you were never actually there to hear them." "Elena, I stopped telling you things. Cassian, important things. Things a wife should be able to tell her husband. And you never even noticed." The silence after that was of a different quality. Not cold. Something more like the quiet of a room after a piece of furniture has been moved. The suddenly visible outline of where it used to be. "What things?" he said. His voice came out wrong, rough in a way he hadn't planned. Not now. She sounded tired. Not angry anymore, just tired in the way that comes from carrying something alone for too long. "I can't do this on the phone." "Then let me come." He didn't breathe through it. "Give me a week," she said finally. "I need a week." He wanted to argue. The part of him that had been trained to move fast, to close gaps, to never give an opponent time to regroup. That part said to push, to go now, to not wait. He said, "Okay." She hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand and the empty office around him, and the feeling that he had just made the most important negotiation of his life without understanding any of the terms. Silas received the call at 11:14 that night. He answered on the second ring. "She's still in the city," the voice on the other end said. Male, careful, the particular flatness of someone reading from a mental script. He called her tonight. She agreed to see him. "When?" he said. She asked for a week. He agreed. "That's a problem. I know. It needs to move faster. She can't be reachable when he goes looking. And if he finds out what he's about to find out about the accounts, he'll connect it before we're ready. I can put eyes on her. Make sure she does not have eyes. Resolution before the week is up. Make it look like she left, moved on, went somewhere he can't follow." "Yes," Silas said. "It is." He ended the call. In the apartment on the north side of the city, Elena Voss lay on her side on a narrow bed with her knees drawn up and her hand resting at the small curve of her stomach, listening to the building settle around her. She had called no one in her family and told no one but Mara and the doctor, and she was so tired of carrying this alone that the tiredness had become its own kind of companion. Familiar, ever present, the thing that walked with her from room to room in the apartment with the broken elevator and the curtain that moved in a draft she could never find the source of. She had not meant to agree to see him. She lay in the dark and told herself it was because she owed him the confrontation, because carrying this silently was its own kind of cowardice, because their son, she thought, and the words still moved through her with a force she was not ready for, deserved more than two parents who communicated through absence and hung up phone calls. She did not let herself think about what it had felt like to hear his voice say, "Okay," in that particular way, with that particular silence before it. She could not afford to think about that. Outside, on the street below, a car she had not noticed before was parked at the corner. If Elena had looked, she might have wondered about it, but the curtain over the parking lot window was closed, and she was not looking, and the car sat where it sat and waited. 7 days later, Silas had been told he intended to need fewer than 3. The first day passed without incident. The second day, Elena's downstairs neighbor, a retired man named Bert, who smelled pipe tobacco and left his door open when the weather was warm, knocked on her door at 7 o'clock in the morning to tell her that someone had been asking about her at the building entrance the previous night. A man, polite, said he was an old friend trying to reconnect. Elena thanked him, closed the door, stood with her back against it and her eyes in the middle of the room. She called Mara. Mara didn't answer. She packed a bag. Not everything, just the things that mattered. The ultrasound photos, all 4 of them in a folded envelope. Her documents, her medication, the cash she kept in the lining of the winter coat she'd brought from Westport. She was still thinking when the door to the stairwell at the end of the corridor opened, and she heard footsteps she did not recognize, heavier than Bert, more deliberate than the young woman in 4C who always took the stairs 2 at a time. And she picked up her bag and went to the window over the parking lot and opened it. The fire escape was there. She went down the fire escape in her coat, with her bag over one shoulder and her hand on the cold iron railing, moving carefully because the stairs were wet from the rain she had slept through. She called the one number she had not yet used. Cassian answered before the second ring. "Someone's watching the apartment," she said. "Not your people." A beat of silence, short but loaded. "No, I just came down the fire escape. I'm on Ferrell Street, the corner of Frell and 9th. Don't move," he said. 12 minutes. He made it in 9. The black SUV pulled to the curb and the door opened and Elena got in and did not look at him right away, which was the right instinct because she needed approximately 4 seconds to arrange her face into something that was not relief. "Are you hurt?" he said. He nodded once, then said something quietly to the driver, and the car moved. "How long has someone been watching you?" he said. "I don't know. At least since last night." She kept her eyes forward. "Bert, my downstairs neighbor, saw someone at the entrance. And then this morning, I heard someone in the corridor who wasn't a resident. Description. I didn't see them. I heard footsteps and I left." She glanced at him sideways. "I wasn't going to open the door and check. I need to take you somewhere safe. He said, I know, Elena. He stopped, started again. I know you don't want to be. I said, I know, Cassian. She looked at him directly for the first time. Let's deal with the immediate problem first. He nodded, pulled out his phone. Someone had been watching the apartment, not Cassian's people. Then whose? She pressed her hand flat to her stomach under the line of her coat. Okay, Cassian said, ending the call. I'm taking you to a house in Fairfield. It's not on record under anything connected to me. You'll be before we go anywhere, Elena said. I need to tell you something. He looked at her. She reached into the inner pocket of her coat and took out the folded envelope and opened it, and handed him the earliest ultrasound photo, the one from 12 weeks, the one she had been carrying to his hotel on the morning everything ended. He took it, looked at it. 15 weeks, she said. I was coming to tell you that morning at the hotel. I came to surprise you. He looked at the photo for a very long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were different. Something had moved through them and left a watermark. Elena, I'm not telling you so that you'll feel worse, she said. I'm telling you because you needed to know, and because I was wrong to wait this long. Whatever happens between us, he's yours. He deserved to have his father know he exists. Cassian looked back at the photo. His hand, she noticed, was not entirely steady. A son, he said. Not a question, just the word placed carefully in the air between them, like something that needed space around it. A son, she said. The SUV moved through the city, and neither of them spoke for a long time, and the silence this time was of an entirely different quality than all the silences that had come before it. 5. She unpacked her bag into the bedroom at the back of the house and came back to the kitchen and made tea and sat at the table. He came into the kitchen and sat across from her. My people didn't put anyone on your building, he said. I need you to understand that. I believe you. He looked at her like he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. I believe you that the woman was staged, she said. I believed you on the phone, actually. I just wrapped both hands around her mug. It doesn't make the other things less true. I know. Then who? She said. I'm working on that, Cassian. Her voice sharpened. Someone was watching my apartment. Someone who knew where I was. Someone who knows enough about your operation to manufacture a false identity with a monogrammed shirt. This is an abstract. That's our son. Something hardened in his jaw. I know. So who? I have a name I'm not ready to say yet, because if I'm wrong, it creates a problem I can't undo. And if I'm right, he stopped. If I'm right, it's worse than wrong. She studied him. How long have you known this name? I don't know. I suspect it. How long have you suspected it? A silence. 4 days. Who is it? She said. Silas, he said. The name landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a height. Elena had met Silas Romano perhaps a dozen times across 4 years of marriage. Tell me why, she said. His brother was killed 11 years ago, he said, by my father's order. I didn't know about it until 2 years after the fact. I've never been certain whether Silas knows that I know. And you kept him. He was loyal or performed loyalty well enough that the difference didn't matter. He paused. In my world, that's usually enough. He's been with you 11 years, she said, working through it. Which means he's been planning this for possibly all of it. Everything I trusted him with, every decision he was close to, every piece of information he had access to. 11 years of a man standing at Cassian's shoulder with a reason to want him destroyed, watching and waiting and building something piece by piece, with the patience of someone who understood that the most devastating revenge is not quick. The accounts, she said something was assembling itself. You said there were financial irregularities. He looked at her sharply. You mentioned it on the phone. Silas flagged something in the Western accounts. He flagged it, Cassian said slowly, so that I would look at it, so that I'd be distracted looking at the accounts while he stopped. She watched him put it together in real time, watched something move behind his eyes. While at the hotel, the woman stood up from the table abruptly and took 3 steps toward the window and stopped with his back to her. He used the investigation to run the investigation. He told me he was looking for who staged the hotel room while he was the one who staged it. He controlled what I was looking at and what I wasn't. He turned around. He's been managing my search, Cassian said. For 3 weeks I've been hunting this with his help. And his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His jaw tightened. Silas. he answered it. Elena watched his face. Cass. Silas's voice was audible from across the table. Not clearly, but enough. The familiar tone. Easy. Professional. I've got something on the hotel, woman. I think we have a break. Can you come in? Where? Cassian said. Carmine Street. 1 hour. I'll be there. He ended the call. You're going? Elena said. Yes. He moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. I will be back. Cassian. She said it before she had decided to. He stopped. Be careful. Not for me, for she touched her hand to her stomach, not dramatically, just the gesture, small and honest. He looked at her hand, then at her face. I'll be back, he said again, and left. Silas was already at the table in the back room of the restaurant on Carmine Street when Cassian arrived. The woman from the hotel, Silas said, opening the folder. Her real name is Daria Moss. She's been used by 2 other operations in the past 3 years for exactly this kind of placement. Manufactured scenarios for blackmail or leverage. We got her through a contact in Baltimore. He slid a photograph across. Whoever hired her paid through 3 layers of shell accounts, which is what took so long to what's at the end of the shell accounts, Cassian said. Silas looked up. We haven't gotten there yet. You've had 3 weeks. Where does the money come from? I'm still working on that, Silas said. Let me help you. Cassian leaned forward. His hands were flat on the table between them. I pulled the Western accounts myself last night, the ones you flagged 3 weeks ago, and I found something interesting. The irregularity you brought to my attention. The one that's been keeping my attention on the financial side while you manage everything else. He paused. It's not an irregularity. It's a mechanism, a routing structure that's been in place for 14 months, drawing small amounts from 6 different accounts into a single holding position that doesn't appear in any of our standard reports. You built it carefully, Cassian said. But you built it while I was watching other things, and I wasn't watching it because I trusted you to watch it for me. That's a serious accusation, Silas said. His voice had not changed register. Still even? Still professional? Yes, Cassian agreed. It is. You're going to need more than a routing structure. I have more. Cassian reached into his jacket and set his own folder on the table, thinner than Silas's, but what was in it had taken his accountant 4 hours to construct and another 2 hours to verify. The identity used to build Claire Vander, the woman at the hotel, was purchased through a broker in Delaware. The broker's operating account received a wire transfer 14 months ago from one of the holding positions in the structure I just described. He tapped the folder once. You paid for the identity that ruined my marriage 18 months before you used it. The silence that followed was of a completely different quality than all the silences in the room before it. Silas looked at the folder, then at Cassian, and something happened in his face that Cassian had never seen there in 11 years. The performance dropped, not all at once, but in layers, like paint blistering from heat, and underneath it was something raw and long-standing, and entirely without apology. Your father killed my brother, Silas said. You knew. You've known me for 2 years. Yes, and you kept me. Yes, you kept me. Silas said it again, and the repetition was not confusing. It was the particular emphasis of a man restating something that constitutes a crime. You knew what my brother meant to me, and you kept me close, and you watched me, and you said nothing, and you thought that was what? Mercy? I thought it was trust. Cassian said I was wrong. You were wrong about a lot of things. Silas leaned back. She was going to give you everything. A son, a real life, and you would have slept through it. You would have let it happen around you and been present for none of it, and she would have spent 20 years loving a man who was always halfway out the door. He tilted his head slightly. I just moved the timeline. You put men outside her apartment, Cassian said. His voice was very low. She's 15 weeks pregnant. Something moved across Silas's face, gone before Cassian could read it. I didn't know that. You're lying. I'm not. And this strangely had the ring of truth. Silas's one genuine surprise in the whole conversation. A single threat of something real in the performance. He hadn't known. The men outside the apartment had been sent to prevent Elena from becoming a reconciliation before Silas was ready, not knowing what they were threatening. It didn't make it better. It made it worse in a different way. Cassian stood up from the table. Where are you going? Silas said. To end this, Silas reached inside his jacket. Cassian's 2 men were through the door before the hand completed its motion. and the room tightened into the specific configuration of men and angles that Cassian had navigated so many times it had its own geometry in his memory. But Silas did not bring out a weapon. He brought out a phone, set it on the table face up. On the screen was a text message, 2 lines. "She left the house. We have her." The room was absolutely still in the way that rooms are still in the moment before something irreversible happens. And Cassian stood in the center of it, and felt something close in him that had been open his entire adult life. Some last remaining door through which mercy, patience, and the habits of civilization could still enter. It closed. "Where?" he said. Silas looked at him across the table with 11 years of planning behind his eyes and said nothing. And Cassian understood in that moment that the man he had always been, the man who built carefully, who operated through intermediaries, who kept his hands at a certain distance from the worst things done in his name, was no longer sufficient for what came next. Cassian hit Silas once, not with the controlled, deliberate force of a man who has done violence professionally for 20 years. With his fist and his weight and everything behind it, the way you hit something when the performance of being a certain kind of man has finally exhausted itself, and what's left underneath is just the animal fact of rage. Silas's head snapped back, and the chair went sideways, and one of Cassian's men moved forward instinctively, and Cassian said, "Don't," in a voice that stopped the man where he stood. Silas was on the floor, blood from his lip. He touched it with 2 fingers and looked at his hand, and then looked up at Cassian with an expression that was not fear and not surprise and not pain. Exactly. Something more like satisfaction. The expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for the real conversation to begin. "Where is she?" Cassian said. Silas said nothing. "You won't find her in time. That's not a location." "No," Silas agreed. "It's not." Cassian stood up. He turned to the taller of his 2 men, a man named Reunite, who had worked for him for 6 years and who possessed, among other qualities, an exceptional memory for operational detail. "The holding houses," Cassian said. "Everything we've used in the last 3 years that Silas had access to. List them," Reunite began. 7 locations. Cassian listened to each one and ranked them in his mind by probability, proximity to the city, accessibility without drawing attention, structural capacity to hold someone without the neighbors asking questions. "The warehouse on Delm Road," Cassian said. Something happened in Silas's eyes. Almost nothing. A single frame of adjustment quickly suppressed. But Cassian had been watching this man's face for 11 years, and he caught it the way you catch emotion in your peripheral vision. Not by looking directly at it, but by having been trained to notice. "Get him up," Cassian said to Reunite. "He comes with us." The warehouse on Delm Road was 23 minutes from the restaurant on Carmine Street. Cassian made it in 16. He drove himself, which he had not done in years. The kind of tactical decision that bypasses the rational mind entirely and comes directly from the body's understanding that speed matters more than protocol. Reunite followed in a second car with Silas. 2 more men in a third. Cassian called ahead, not to anyone at the warehouse. He didn't know who was at the warehouse or whose loyalty they currently operated under. But to his man Torres, who had been with him for 8 years and had never been in the same room as Silas in a professional capacity, which made him the most trustworthy asset available. "Delum Road," he said when Torres answered. "I need eyes on it before I arrive. Tell me what you see. Give me 4 minutes. You have 2. He drove. Torres called back in 90 seconds. 2 cars outside. 1 man at the front entrance was visible. Lights on the ground floor. I count movement through the window. At least 3 inside, maybe more. Anyone on the roof? Can't confirm. Possibly the loading entrance at the back. Gated, padlocked from what I can see. They'll come through the back." He thought for 1 second. "Torres. Is she? I can't confirm from this distance. Get closer." A pause. Footsteps. The sound of Torres moving. Cassian turned onto Delm Road and killed his headlights 2 blocks out and drove the rest of the way on the orange spill of the streetlights. "There's a woman inside," Torres said. "Ground floor, east side. She's seated. She's a pause that lasted too long. She's upright. She looks okay from what I can see." The thing in Cassian's chest that had been wound to maximum tension for the past 53 minutes released approximately 5% of its pressure. Enough to breathe, not enough to slow down. He parked, got out. The night air was cold and smelled of diesel and standing water. He moved around the perimeter of the building at a pace that looked unhurried from a distance and covered ground quickly. The back gate was padlocked with a chain, heavy gauge, the kind that takes time. He didn't have time. He had the gun from his jacket, and he shot the padlock twice, and the chain gave, and he pushed the gate open and moved through. Behind him, Riran's car was pulling up at the front. He had 30 seconds before everything began. He came through the loading entrance, low and fast, with the gun up, and the geometry of the space resolved itself in front of him, the way spaces always did when his mind was running at this particular frequency instantly, completely. The way a map downloads rather than builds incrementally. High ceilings, concrete floor, machinery stacked along the left wall, a partition wall across the middle of the space with light coming through the gap at the bottom. One man between him and the partition, young, turned at the wrong moment. He had been facing the front, expecting the disruption to come from there, which was the point of the two-pronged approach, and the half-second of reorientation was enough. Cashin hit him at the temple with the grip of the gun rather than shooting him, which was a decision made in a fraction of a second on the basis of noise management and the preference for leaving people alive when it was operationally possible. The man went down through the gap in the partition. 2 more men on the other side. They had heard something. Not enough to have their weapons fully raised, but enough to have their hands moving. The one on the left was faster, and Cassian shot him in the shoulder rather than center mass, because center mass was final, and he still did not know the full shape of what Silas had set in motion, and Dead Man answered nothing. The one on the right stopped when he saw the one on the left go down and did the math and raised his hands. On the floor? Cassian said the man got on the floor. Elena was at the far end of the space, seated in a metal chair with her wrists zip-tied to the armrests, not injured from what he could see. Her posture was straight, not the slumped posture of someone in shock or physical distress. Her chin was up. She was watching him cross the floor toward her with an expression that was part relief and part something harder. The expression of a person who has been managing their fear with great discipline for some time, and is now having to manage the additional complexity of being rescued by the person they are also furious with. He crouched in front of her, pulled a folding knife from his pocket and cut the zip ties. Her hands came free and she pressed them together for a moment's circulation, and then she looked at him and said, "How many were there?" 3 in here, more out front. From the other side of the building, he could hear the sounds of Riran and Torres working through the front entrance. Not gunshots. Not yet. The sounds of rapid, controlled movement. "Are you hurt?" "No." She flexed her hands. "They didn't touch me. I think they were waiting for her to stop." Something moved through her face. "Silas. He's in a car outside." Her eyes sharpened. He was going to come here himself, yes. He stood and offered her his hand. She took it and stood, and he registered the weight and warmth of her grip, and did not examine it because he did not have the bandwidth to examine it, and also function, and functioning was what the next 20 minutes required. "Can you walk?" "I've been sitting in a chair for 2 hours, not running a marathon." She let go of his hand. "I can walk." From the front of the building came a short, sharp sound. Shh, not quite a shot, something impacting something, and then silence, and then Torres's voice calling clear. Cassian guided Elena toward the loading entrance, his hand at the small of her back without thinking about it. The gesture of a body that had spent 4 years learning her specific dimensions and had not unlearned them. They came through the back gate, and Elena stopped and took in 3 full breaths of the night air like someone surfacing. Cassian watched her do it. Her hands were at her sides and her eyes were closed for exactly those 3 breaths. And then they opened, and she looked at him. "I need to sit down," she said. "Not because I'm going to fall. I just need to sit down." He opened the car door. She got in. He crouched in the open doorway so they were eye level. Her face in the low light was composed and exhausted and carrying something he recognized. The specific fatigue of a person who has been frightened and has not allowed themselves to be frightened, which takes more out of you than the fear itself. "I'm okay," she said, as if she'd read the specific thing he was looking at. I know he wasn't entirely sure that was true, but she needed him to say it, and he needed to say something that wasn't the actual content of what was moving through him, which was too large and too unmanageable for a parking area behind a warehouse on Delm Road. "I need you to stay in the car for 10 more minutes. She looked at him steadily. "Silas." "Yes." "What are you going to do?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her face, the set of it, the particular quality of the question, which was not naive. She knew what he was capable of. She had always known. It was one of the facts of the life she had married into, something she had made her private accommodation with in the first year, something that had sat between them always, usually unnamed. "I'm going to finish it," he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. "Cash in." Her voice had changed. Lower, more careful. "There's a different way to finish it. Elena, I know what you want to do. I understand why." Her hands were in her lap, steady. "But he's not worth what it would cost you." "What would it cost?" She didn't finish the sentence. She touched her hand to her stomach instead. The same small gesture from the car that morning, and it landed in him with more force than the actual words. He looked at her hand, then her face. "Stay in the car," he said, and stood up. Silas was in the back seat of Riran's car with his hands zip-tied, a symmetry that Cassian noted without comment, and the kind of stillness that had once read as professionalism and now read as something else, something that had been sustained too long and was beginning to show its true composition. Cassian opened the door and got in beside him. Riran and the driver got out without being asked. The two of them sat in the back of the car, in the dark on Delm Road, and the silence between them was not like any of the silences they had shared across 11 years. Those silences had been professional silences, comfortable silences, the silences of two men who understood each other's operational rhythms. This one was the silence of what they actually were to each other. Finally, without the architecture of loyalty and shared history between them. "She's not hurt," Cassian said. Silas looked forward through the windshield. Good. Good. You didn't know about the pregnancy?" "No. But you would have done it anyway. Not a question." Silas turned his head, looked at Cassian directly. "I didn't want to hurt her," he said. "I never wanted to hurt her. She wasn't the target." Target. She was in the chair. As leverage, she would have been released. When? The word came out sharp. When exactly was she going to be released, Silas? After you'd finished destroying everything between us? After she'd miscarried from the stress? After you'd confirmed that she'd taken the baby and disappeared, and I had nothing left to do? He stopped. His voice had been rising, and he brought it back down with an effort that was physically visible. You don't get to define the limits of what you were willing to do to her. That's not your call to make. Silas said nothing. His jaw was set. "My father killed your brother," Cassian said. "I know. I've known. And I kept you because I believed that the work we'd done together meant something. I believed it had created something real that was separate from history." He paused. "Was any of it real?" Silas was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it was in a voice that had some texture in it for the first time, something human and old and tired. "Some of it," he said, "more than I planned for." He looked at his hands bound in his lap. "That made it harder, not easier." "You did it anyway?" "Yes." Cassian looked out the windshield. Somewhere behind them, Torres was securing the front of the building and Riran was organizing the situation into something manageable. The operational part of him was already running triage. What needed to be locked down? Who needed to be relocated? What will the exposure look like across the network after tonight? 11 years. The exposure was significant. "The accounts," Cassian said. "The full structure. I need everything. You'll need to find it yourself. Silas, I'm not helping you clean up what I built. Not defiant, just flat. The statement of a man who has accepted the situation and is choosing the only remaining ground he can hold. I built it carefully. It'll take you time, but you'll find it." Cassian looked at him. For a long moment, he held the look, and in that moment, he was aware of something he had not expected. Not forgiveness, not even close to forgiveness, but a specific and unexpected clarity about what Silas was and had been, which was a man who had kept his wound so long it had become his identity, who had organized his entire professional life around the single architecture of revenge, and who had been, in his own warped way, as trapped by it as anyone. This did not make him sympathetic. It made him pitiable, which was worse. "You're going to spend the rest of your life somewhere, I put you," Cassian said. "And you're going to spend it knowing that she's alive, that the child is alive, that everything you did, all of it, 11 years of it, produced nothing that lasts." He held Silas's gaze. "I won't kill you. That would make this about my anger. This is going to be about the rest of your life. He got out of the car. The night air hit him, and he stood for a moment with his hands at his sides and his eyes on the warehouse building and its ordinary, indifferent face. His shoulder arced. He had not noticed until now that at some point in the past 20 minutes he had taken impact somewhere, a glancing contact with a doorframe or a wall. Nothing serious, but real, the body making its accounting. He rolled the shoulder once, noted it, set it aside. He walked back to his car. Elena was in the passenger seat where he had left her. She watched him come across the parking area, watched the way he moved, the set of his shoulders, the particular quality of his hands at his sides. He got in. The car was warm. She was looking at him. "Is it over?" She said the immediate part. He started the car. "There's a longer part. It's going to take months to work through what he built inside the organization. The financial structure, the compromised relationships." He stopped. Aware that he was doing the thing he had always done, defaulting to the operational, using the language of logistics to avoid the language of everything else. He made himself stop. "We're safe. You're safe. The rest he'll handle." She looked at him for a moment. Something was moving through her face that he could not fully read. Then she turned forward and looked through the windshield. "Then drive," she said. He drove. They were 3 minutes from the warehouse when Elena, looking straight ahead, said quietly, "I felt him move tonight while I was in the chair for the first time. I didn't want that to be the first time." Cassian's hands tightened on the wheel. He didn't trust his voice for a moment. He let a beat pass. "Tell me when he does it again," he said. She turned her head and looked at him. Her expression was unreadable in the moving light. Then she turned back to the windshield and said nothing. And the city unrolled before them through the glass. And Cassian drove toward it with the awareness, clean and specific and impossible to look at directly, like light after dark, that whatever came next, whatever she decided, whatever the long and difficult road of earning anything looked like, he was going to be on it. Not because he deserved to be, because she and the child they had made together were on it, and there was no version of himself he could live in that was not moving in the same direction as they were, even if she needed him 20 paces behind for a long time yet. His phone lit up on the console. "Torres," the message read, "front clear, 5 secured. Rearan has the primary. What do you want done with the rest?" He picked up the phone one-handed and typed back, "Hold them. Nobody moves until I give the word." He set the phone down, looked at the road. Behind them, Delm Road and its warehouse and Silas Romano and 11 years of careful, patient destruction were receding in the mirror. Ahead, the city was doing what cities always did at this hour, burning its lights against the dark with no awareness of what had just happened inside it. No acknowledgement of the specific violence and specific tenderness that had coexisted in the same 2-hour stretch of an otherwise ordinary night. Elena had her hand resting at her stomach again. She was not aware of doing it. Or maybe she was and had stopped caring whether he saw. He saw. He said nothing because there was nothing to say yet that would not come out wrong, and he had been saying the wrong things for 4 years. And the one thing he understood clearly, in the specific and humbling clarity of a man who has just run through a warehouse to bring his pregnant wife home, was that the next thing he said to her needed to be right. So he drove, and he let the silence be what it was. Not empty, not comfortable, but inhabited, shared. 2 people in a moving car in the dark, with everything still ahead of them and the worst of what was behind them. Finally done. The city rose around them. His knuckles on the wheel were white, with the effort of holding everything at exactly the right distance, close enough to feel, far enough to function, and ahead through the windshield. The lights of the highway offered the one thing he had not had in 3 weeks, a direction. They stayed in the Fairfield house for 11 days, not because it was safe enough. Cassian had 3 men on the property around the clock and Torres had swept the perimeter twice, but because neither of them was ready for what came after. This was not discussed. It was simply understood the way things are understood between 2 people who have lived inside each other's rhythms long enough that the bones know what the mouth hasn't said yet. Doyle stalked the kitchen without being asked. Elena cooked because cooking was something to do with her hands and her hands needed occupation. And the alternative was sitting in the rooms of the house thinking about the chair in the warehouse on Delm Road and the zip ties, and the specific quality of the fear she had managed with such discipline that she had not allowed herself to fully feel it until the third morning in Fairfield, when she woke at 4 a.m. and sat on the edge of the bed and shook for 20 minutes without sound. Cashin was asleep on the other side of the bed. She had not asked him to be there, and he had not asked permission. On the first night, he had settled into the chair in the corner of the room, which was both unnecessary and transparent, and she had looked at him in the chair and said, "This is a 4-bedroom house." And he had said, "I know." And she had said, "You're not sleeping in a chair." And he had moved to the bed and kept to his side with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood that the distance between them was not a failure of proximity but of time, and that the only way to reduce it was to hold it steady and not push. So she shook on the edge of the bed at 4 a.m. and he woke. She felt the mattress shift, the almost imperceptible change in his breathing that meant he had moved from sleep to alert in the specific way men of his background always did. Instantly, completely, no gradation. And he said nothing for a moment. Then he sat up. He didn't touch her. He sat beside her on the edge of the bed in the dark with his feet on the floor and his elbows on his knees, and he stayed there while she shook and then stopped shaking. And then he said quietly, "I've got you." Not "you're safe" or "it's over" or any of the things people say to fill the silence of someone else's fear. Just that. Present tense, unqualified. She pressed her hands flat to her thighs and breathed until the breathing was normal. And she did not lean into him, but she did not move away either. And after a while, they both lay back down, and she did not sleep again. But the dark was less dense than it had been, and that was enough. On the fourth day, Cashin drove back to the city alone. He had told her he needed 3 days. He took 4. In that time, he dismantled with the systematic efficiency of a man who built things, and therefore understood how they came apart from the financial structure that Silas had been constructing inside his organization for 14 months. His accountant worked 72 hours across 4 days. 2 of the shell companies were dissolved. 3 compromised accounts were frozen, and the funds rerouted through mechanisms that Silas had no knowledge of because Cassian had built them after Silas before any of this, in the routine paranoia of a man who never fully trusted any single person with everything. The irony of that particular habit did not escape him. He also made 3 calls that needed to be made in person, to men in Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Miami, who had been doing business with his organization for years, and who had, to varying degrees, also been doing business with structures that Silas had quietly built parallel to his. These conversations were not pleasant. 2 of them required concessions. One of them required the kind of specific demonstration of consequence that Cassian had not needed to perform himself in several years, and which he performed with the controlled, joyless precision of a man who understands that certain messages cannot be delegated. He came back to Fairfield on a Thursday evening with a split lip and a bruised rib that he had taped himself in the car because stopping at a medical facility was not an option, and Elena saw it immediately. She saw everything now. Watched him the way you watch something you've been negligent about and are trying to recalibrate. And she said, "Sit down." In a voice that admitted no argument, he sat at the kitchen table and let her look at the split lip and the way he held his right side. "Tape," she said. "Already done. Show me." He lifted his shirt. She looked at the tape job without touching it, her face making no particular judgment. Then she looked at his face. "Is it over?" She said the same question she had asked in the car outside Delm Road. "The organizational part." "Yes." He lowered his shirt. "Silas has been transferred to a facility and he's secured. He won't be a problem." She studied him. "You didn't kill him?" "No." "Why not?" He met her eyes. "Because you asked me not to." This landed between them. She held it for a moment, then turned to the sink and ran water over a cloth, and brought it back and pressed it to his lip, not roughly, but not gently either. With the particular competence of someone who has decided to do a thing and is doing it, he sat still and let her. "That's not the only reason," she said, a statement, not a question. "No, but it's the reason that was different from what I would have done otherwise." She pressed the cloth to his lip, and he watched her face at close range. The concentration in it, the lines around her eyes that were new since the last time he'd been this close. The specific way her jaw set when she was deciding something. She looked older than she had 4 months ago. She looked more like herself. "The business," she said. "What's left of it?" diminished. The parts I had to burn to clean out the infection. He stopped. The organization is smaller than it was. Some relationships are gone. Some of what I spent 20 years building is... He searched for the word that was honest. Reduced. She took the cloth away, looked at his lip. The bleeding had stopped. Are you? She paused. He saw her choosing the form of the question. Are you going to rebuild it? No. She looked at him directly. I'm going to dismantle the rest of it, he said. Legally where I can, through other means where I can't. It's going to take time. Some of what I built doesn't come apart cleanly. It has to be wound down slowly or the structural collapse creates other problems. He held her gaze. But no, I'm not going to rebuild it. Why? He looked at her hand, which was still holding the damp cloth, and at the slight curve of her stomach under her shirt, and at the kitchen of the house in Fairfield that smelled of the pasta she had made earlier, and the coffee that had been sitting too long, and the ordinary domestic details of a life being provisionally, carefully lived. Because you were right, he said, what you said on the phone. I built something that I was always halfway out the door of, and I used what I built to justify being halfway out, and that became the whole design. Always another meeting, another problem, another emergency that required me instead of any of the 1,000 other things I should have been present for, he exhaled. The organization didn't make me absent. I used it to be absent. Those are different things. She looked at him for a long time. Her face did not soften exactly, but something in it acknowledged that he had said something true, which was its own kind of movement. That doesn't fix 4 years, she said. I know. Saying it doesn't fix it. I know. He held her gaze without flinching from it. I'm not asking you to forgive anything. I'm asking you to let me be in the same rooms as you and our son while I try to be worth the space. The word son moved across her face. It always did. He had noticed this in the past 4 days. The specific way the word landed on her. The small, involuntary thing that happened around her eyes whenever their child was made specific. She set the cloth on the table. I'm going to bed, she said. He nodded. She walked to the door of the kitchen, stopped without turning around. There's pasta on the stove, she said. Don't leave the kitchen dirty. She left. He sat at the table and listened to her footsteps on the stairs, and when the sound stopped, he reached for the cloth she had left and folded it over the edge of the sink. And then he ate the pasta, cold from the pot standing at the stove, because heating it meant waiting and he was very tired. And then he washed the pot in the bowl and the fork and dried them and put them away. He stood in the clean kitchen for a moment in the quiet of the house and let the specific shape of the moment exist without trying to make it into anything larger than it was. Then he turned off the light and went upstairs. Luca Moretti was born on a Tuesday in March, 7 weeks after the night, on Delm Road in a hospital in a mid-sized city 2 hours north of where any of this had happened. Under conditions that were medically unremarkable and personally extraordinary, he weighed 7 pounds 2 ounces. He had dark hair that lay flat against his skull, and a face that was concentrated and deeply unimpressed with its circumstances, which Elena, exhausted and split open with love, in a way she had not been prepared for by any of her prior experience of the world, said was exactly his father's face. Cashin, sitting beside the bed with the child in his arms for the first time, looked down at the concentrated, unimpressed face and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "He looks like you. He has your exact expression," Elena said, "the one you make when someone is wasting your time." The expression Cassian was currently making was not that expression. She knew what it was. She had imagined it in those first weeks of the pregnancy before everything collapsed. When she had still been constructing the fantasy of telling him, she had imagined his face doing something it rarely did, the careful machinery of it going quiet and open. She had been right about that. She had not been right about the degree of it. She had not anticipated that Cassian Moretti, who had faced men with guns with less visible feeling than most people brought to difficult phone calls, would hold his newborn son for the first time and look like something inside him had been set down after a very long carry. He held the baby for 40 minutes without putting him down. When a nurse came to take Luca for routine measurements, Cassian tracked the nurse across the room with his eyes the entire time she had the baby, which Elena noticed and did not comment on because she had been doing the same thing. They did not go back to the house in Westport. This was Elena's decision, stated plainly and without negotiation. And Cassian accepted it without argument, because the house in Westport was the house where she had spent 4 years learning to not mind things. And walking back into it would have been like asking someone who was healed from a particular wound to live inside the instrument that made it. They found a house in a smaller town 40 minutes north. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a street where other families lived and children left bicycles in driveways. And no one would know the specific history of the people who had moved in. Cassian bought it in both their names, which was itself a statement, and which Elena read correctly as such. He moved his remaining legal business operations to a firm managed by people he trusted to run them without him, which was a different kind of trust than the trust he had exercised towards Silas, and which he calibrated differently. He kept his phone. He kept certain relationships that were not cleanly separable from the world he was dismantling. This was the reality Elena had made her accommodation with, that it did not come apart overnight, that unwinding 20 years of architecture was not a switch, but a process. But he was home for dinner. Not occasionally, not when the day permitted it. Home for dinner in the way that a man is home for dinner when it is the thing around which everything else is organized rather than the thing organized around everything else, she noticed. She did not say anything about it for the first 2 weeks. In the 3rd week, she said, "You came home early today?" And he said, "I had a call at 4 o'clock and moved it to tomorrow." And she said, "You didn't have to do that." And he said, "I know." And she said, "Nothing else." And that was enough. And then it happened again and again. And the pattern began to accumulate the way patterns do, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the specific and undeniable way of adding to days. He built the cradle himself. This was not something anyone asked him to do. He had no particular skill with woodworking. He had grown up in a world where things were bought, not made, where the demonstration of resources was more legible than the demonstration of effort. But he had found in the weeks after Delm Road and before Luca's birth that his hands needed work that was not the work of his professional life, that the specific satisfaction of making something physical was different from any other kind of satisfaction he had access to, and that the difference mattered. He bought a book and lumber and the specific tools he needed from a hardware store where no one knew him. And he worked in the garage of the Fairfield house on the evenings when Elena was resting, and he made mistakes. 3. Serious enough to require starting sections over, and he corrected them. The cradle that resulted was not artisan quality. The joints were slightly irregular on one side, and the finish was uneven in the corner where he had rushed it on the last evening, because Luca was already 3 days past his due date, and Cassian had felt irrationally but powerfully that the cradle needed to be done before the baby arrived. Elena came into the garage the evening he finished it, stood looking at it for a moment, ran her hand along the side rail. "It's not level," she said. "I know. I'll fix the foot." She looked at it for another moment. "Don't," she said. Then she went back inside. He stood in the garage for a moment after she left. Something had moved through him at the word, the single syllable of it, and what it meant that she didn't want it fixed, and what it meant that she had come to look at it at all. He turned off the garage light and went inside. The conversation happened on a Sunday in June when Luca was 11 weeks old and the summer had come properly. The kind of summer that arrived all at once in the way of that particular latitude. Suddenly warm, suddenly green, the yard outside the back window transformed overnight from the muddy promise of spring into something that looked like what Cassian had never particularly wanted until now, when he wanted it with a straightforwardness that surprised him. Elena had put Luca down after his morning feed, and she came out to the back porch where Cassian was sitting with coffee. And she sat in the other chair, and they sat in the way they had been learning to sit together again. Not uncomfortable, not entirely easy. The way 2 people sit when they are rebuilding something and are honest enough with themselves to not pretend it's rebuilt yet. "I want to tell you something," she said. He waited. "I was angry with you before any of this happened." She was looking at the yard. "I want you to understand that the hotel, the woman, the setup, Silas, all of that came after I was already angry. I had been angry for a long time, and I had not told you because I had decided somewhere along the way that telling you was pointless, that you weren't available for it." He held his coffee, said nothing. "That's not entirely fair," she said. "You were available. I just didn't believe you would receive it, and that's a different thing. That's something I did. I closed the channel, and then I blamed you for not sending anything through it." She paused. I need to say that because I spent a lot of time in those weeks in the apartment, in the chair, on Delm Road, in the car, building a version of events where I was simply the person that things were done to. And that's true, but it's not the whole truth. Elena, I'm not finished. Not sharp, just clear. He closed his mouth. I also want to tell you that I see what you've been doing since Fairfield. The dinners, the phone calls, the cradle. She finally looked at him. I see it. I want you to know that because I think you've been doing it without knowing whether I noticed, and I don't want you to carry that uncertainty longer than you need to. He looked at her. The morning light was doing something specific to her face. The angle of it, the way the summer had put color into her skin in the past 3 weeks, the fact that she was not wearing the specific expression she had worn for so long, the one she wore when she was managing herself in his presence, when she was deciding how much to show. She was not managing herself right now. She was just sitting in her chair with her coffee and looking at him and saying true things. I noticed, she said. I notice it every time. She set her coffee down. I'm not ready to call it forgiven. I don't know if that word is the right one or if it's a word that applies cleanly to something this complicated, but I am. She stopped and found the specific language. I am willing to find out what we are now, who we are now, with all of this behind us. She looked at the yard. I think we might be something I don't have a word for yet. Something that comes after the thing we were. Cassian sat down for his coffee. He looked at the yard, too. The ordinary, sunlit, improbable yard of a house on a street where people left bicycles in driveways. I'll take that, he said. She nodded, picked up her coffee. They sat in the Sunday morning quiet, and from inside the house came the small sound of Luca. Not crying, just making the sounds he made when he was waking. Small, exploratory sounds. The sounds of a person who is new to the world and is taking its inventory. Elena started to stand. I'll go, Cassian said. She looked at him. He was already up, already moving toward the back door. She watched him go through it, and she sat in the chair on the back porch and listened to the sounds of him in the house, the particular rhythm of his footsteps on the stairs, the slight creak of the nursery door, the specific quality of the quiet that followed, which was the quiet of a man picking up a child. Then Luca's sounds changed, became something settled and content. The sounds of a child who has been lifted into arms that are already familiar. She wrapped both hands around her mug. The morning was warm and the yard was green. And somewhere down the street, a neighbor's dog was moving through its own morning with uncomplicated enthusiasm. And Elena Voss, who had grown up learning that feelings were private things, expensive things, kept folded inside the chest. Let the moment be what it was without folding it. He drove home from that meeting on a Wednesday afternoon in November with Luca's car seat visible in the back mirror and the radio on a station he had never listened to before, Luca, which played the kind of music that was selected to be inoffensive and was therefore usually forgettable, but which on this particular drive was making no specific demands on him and therefore was exactly right. He stopped at a hardware store, bought a new set of leveling feet for the cradle's uneven base, and drove home. Elena was at the kitchen table when he came in, her laptop open, working on the interior design consulting she had quietly resumed in the past month, a practice she had let go in the second year of their marriage without quite deciding to. She looked up when he came in, looked at the bag in his hand. Hardware store, he said, the cradle, the foot. She looked at him for a moment. I told you not to fix it. You told me not to fix it when it was the only thing I'd made. He said there will be others. He held her gaze. I'm going to make other things. He needs furniture for when he's older. A bed eventually. A desk. If you'll let me. Elena looked at him. Something in her expression did the thing it had been doing more often in the past month. Not melting. That was not the right word. Not Elena, but opening. The specific way of a person who has decided incrementally and with full awareness to let something in. Fix the cradle, she said, and then I want to show you something. He set the bag down and went to fix the cradle and came back, and she showed him on the laptop a house listing she had found, larger than the one they were in, with a workshop space in the garage that had proper lighting and ventilation not far from where they were on a street where the driveways had bicycles in them. He looked at the listing, then at her. For the furniture, she said. When you make other things, you need space that isn't a rental garage. He looked at the listing again, at the workshop space with its good lighting at the yard, at the street. "Okay," he said. She closed the laptop. From upstairs came the first sounds of Luca waking from his afternoon sleep. The small inventory sounds new to the world taking stock. Cashin was already moving toward the stairs. "I'll go," he said, the same words as the morning on the porch. And Elena sat at the kitchen table with her closed laptop and listened to him go upstairs. And she did not try to name what she was feeling, because some things were not improved by being named. He came back down 20 minutes later with Luca on his left shoulder, which was the shoulder, and Luca was making the contented sounds of a person who has recently been lifted by familiar hands. And Cashin stood in the kitchen doorway holding his son. Elena looked at the two of them in the afternoon light of a November Wednesday, and something in her chest, which had been folded tight for a very long time, let go of one more layer. Not all of them. That was not how this worked. The layers were many, and the letting go was slow, and some of them would never fully release, because that was the honest truth of what 4 years of absence and one terrible morning in a hotel corridor had made. And she had accepted that she was not going to be the woman she was before all of it, and she was not entirely sure that woman was one she wanted to return to. But she was here. They were here in a kitchen in November, with a child who had his father's eyes and his mother's refusal to be impressed by anything in a life that had been remade from its own wreckage into something that had no precedent and therefore no ceiling. "He needs to eat soon," Elena said. "I know," Cassian said. "He's been making faces." "What face?" He turned Luca slightly so she could see. And Luca, as if on cue, made the face. The specific, compressed expression of a person who has not yet eaten and has opinions about this. Elena laughed. Not the polite laugh of a person performing with ease, the actual laugh. Sudden and unguarded, the one that arrived before her face knew it was coming. Cassian watched her laugh. He had not heard that laugh in almost a year. He had not realized until he heard it again how specifically he had missed it. Not the absence of laughter in general, but the exact particular frequency of hers. Irreplaceable, unreplicable. The sound of Elena Voss being caught off guard by something genuinely funny. He looked at her. She was already composing herself, already reaching for Luca, the laugh settling back into the ordinary expression of a woman who has things to do. "Sit down," she said, taking the baby. "I'll make something." He sat down at the kitchen table where 4 months ago she had shown him the housing listing, and where before that in the Fairfield house she had pressed a cold cloth to his split lip with the particular competence of someone who had decided to do a thing and was doing it. He sat and watched her move through the kitchen with their son against her shoulder and the late November light coming through the window over the sink, and he thought about what she had said on the Sunday porch. "I think we might be something I don't have a word for yet." And he thought that she was right, that there was no word for it because it hadn't existed before now, because they were building it from what had survived the rest. And what survived was not clean or simple or easily described. It was real, though. He was certain of that. Realer than most things he had been certain of across a life built on certainties. Luca made a sound against Elena's shoulder. She adjusted her hold without looking up from what she was doing at the counter. Cashin sat in his chair in the kitchen of the house, on the street where people left bicycles in driveways, in a life that was smaller than the one he had spent 20 years constructing, and larger than anything that life had actually contained. And he did not reach for his phone, and he did not think about what needed handling tomorrow, and he did not plan the next move. He stayed. That was the whole of it. That was the complete shape of the decision and the change, and the long, difficult road from the man he had been to the man sitting in this chair. Not a single dramatic conversion, but 1,000 small arrivals at the same place. The kitchen, the chair, the ordinary Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday of a life that had chosen to include him again after he had done the work of being worth including. It was not a destination. He understood that the destinations were for the kind of stories that ended cleanly. This was not that kind of story. This was the kind that continued past the last page, that sent its people forward into ordinary time, with all their damage and all their love, and the daily requirement to show up as the version of themselves they were still becoming. He watched Elena at the counter, watched his son's fingers close and open against her shoulder, that small, unconscious grip that infants have, the fingers of a person who is learning that the world can be held. Outside, November was doing what November did, arriving fully, darkening early, the trees stripped and honest against a sky that had no interest in sentimentality. Inside the kitchen, the light was warm, and the smell was of whatever Elena was making, and the sounds were of a small person being fed and a man sitting still in a chair for no reason other than that this was where he needed to be. The house settled around them. The street outside went through its quiet evening. Somewhere down the block, a porch light came on. Cassian Moretti, who had once been the most feared man on the East Coast, who had built an empire on blood and precision and the willingness to occupy the space that other men flinched from, who had lost nearly everything that mattered through the accumulated negligence of a man who confused power with presence, sat at his kitchen table and watched his family in the light. And let that be enough. It was.